Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Honor to the sublime one, the worthy one, the fully enlightened one. Okay, looking around, I think I know everybody. Maybe Deacon, I don't know maybe if I've met you before, but I'm pretty sure I remember everybody else. I'll give an introduction. Um, my name is Jayantha. I'm a 35-year-old lay Buddhist disciple of the Theravada tradition. Been on staff here at the Buddhist Center for a couple years now, do a couple different things. Metta meditation on Thursday, basics of Buddhism class um, on Sunday, and Dhamma reading Sunday night. So what we do here is a Dhamma talk slash discussion. Um, if you're familiar with going to a Dhamma talk by monks, usually what they do is they talk for a time, and then after there's a question and answer period. We follow the same way here, except for since I'm not a monk and I like to have a discussion, and I don't often care to hear myself drone on for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. If you have any comments or questions while I'm talking, we can, feel free to make those comments or questions. Don't feel like you're interrupting. The best times that we've had here at this Dhamma talk and discussion are when people were able to discuss and talk about the topic. So, that being said, let's begin. I wanted to talk about something that is fairly core um, to the Buddha's experience, and very core. Well, of course, the Buddha was a human like all of us, so core to all humans. And that would be, we're going to discuss today the Buddha's four significant visions, and stemming from that, one of my favorite things in Buddhism, the five remembrances. Has anybody ever heard of the five remembrances? Anybody understand or know what that is? No? Well, you know what? In different traditions, they call it something a little different. But basically, these are five things that the Buddha said that you should reflect on often. Whether you are a woman or man, lay or ordained, these five things you should reflect on often. And the funny part about these five things are, these are five things that we avoid thinking about at all costs. In our daily life, we don't want to think about them one bit. And when they come visit us, we still don't want to think about them. We want to avoid them and get away from them as soon as possible. So I'll go over the Buddha's four significant visions, and this should give you a little hint as to what these five remembrances are. So if you know the story of the Buddha, we're not going to go through the whole thing. We'll be here for more than an hour. But long story short, he's a prince. His father wants him to be king, so the father tries to hide all the bad stuff about life from the Buddha. His name is Siddhartha. He tries to make sure that the Buddha has all the pleasures and earthly everything that he wants. He's got 3 palaces. He never has to leave the palaces. He's got women. He's got games. He's got entertainment. Whatever he wants, he's there. He's got it. And the reason why this is happening is because there were sages at the time of his birth, and they said either he will become a universal monarch and follow in his father's footsteps, or he will renounce the world and become a Buddha. So of course, your father's this king, right? The father doesn't want he's my heir. He's the prince. He's gonna take over for me. I don't want him to just go wandering in the forest. What would happen to my kingdom, right? So the father did everything that he could to try to hide all of the facts of life from well, not all of the facts of life, but the bad facts of life that we consider bad from the Buddha. So the story goes that he, over a period of time, whether it's all at once on one day or multiple days or whatever, he had these four significant visions. The first significant vision, he's going out into the city, everybody's waving, hey, the prince, because everybody loves the prince. And he sees these old men, these frail, bent over old men, wandering around with a cane. And supposedly he's never seen an old man before in the story. And he's like, who are these creatures? What are these things? And Channa, his attendant, his chariot rider, says, these are old people. This is what happens to all of us. All of us, kings, queens, all beings, grow old. And the Buddha's like, oh, really? Dang, that's crappy. So he's like, oh, I have to think about this. And so they take him, he goes back. So then he has another vision. He comes out again into the city, and he sees a sick person. And the sick person has all boils or whatever. So sometimes it's a leper. Sometimes he's got some kind of disease, boils. And he says, what is this person? Why is this person crying? What's going on with this person? And Channa says, this person is sick. And they have the vision of the Buddha going up and putting this person in his arms, and because the person's suffering and he couldn't talk and all he could do was cry and this and that. And Channa says, and if you aren't careful, you'll be sick too. So this is the second vision, sickness. He's like, oh man, what is going on with this? This is pretty horrible stuff. And so he goes back to the palace. And the story is that the king sees his son all concerned and starting to understand about the realities of life, and he starts throwing more parties and this and that. And the Buddha ain't having it. So Siddhartha's like, yeah, this doesn't quite work. He's becoming dissatisfied, right? So the third vision, he goes out again. The third vision, well, he sees a bunch of people. They're walking down the street. They're crying, and a couple people are holding this guy who's just lying there really still on like a stretcher. And then they go and they put him down, and then they burn him. And the Buddha's like, well, what's going on with this? Why is this guy not doing anything? He's just laying there while they burn him. And Channa says, no, this is death. And this happens to all of us. And so, of course, these visions, all of these things, this is somebody who, could you imagine being 29 years old and not knowing what old age, sickness, and death are? Is that an amazing experience? Now, of course, these are stories, and some might say, well, this is a story, that's not real, it's just an analogy, blah, blah, blah. For me personally, it fits both ways. Either way, if it's a story or if it's real, it works for me. One of the things that being in an anthropology major in college and knowing about archaeology and history and how people work, up until very recently, most people did not go 9 miles from where they were born their whole lives. Is that an amazing thing to know? Imagine 9 miles from where you are right now, and that you never went beyond that your whole life. So I can almost kind of think, well, it's maybe possible, but even if it's a story, it's a good story because we're coming up to the reasons why. And so he goes out again, and he sees this guy who's bald, and he's got a robe on, and he's all happy, and he says, Channa, who is this guy? What's going on with this guy right here? And Channa says, well, this is a renunciate. He's an alms mendicant. He's left the world and to try to find, a better way to live and to teach people, etc. So the Buddha's like, well, you know what? I think this guy's got the right idea. I'm gonna do what he did. And that's how the Buddha goes out into the world to try, and has his 6 years of trying different things, but that's a whole other story. We're not concerned with that. Um, so we have these. So now let's do the 5 remembrances. We did the, uh, and I'll give you a link to these 5 remembrances. Well, actually, they call them, this translation is subjects of contemplation. And you might see some connections here. There are these 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or man, lay or ordained. Which 5? I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions. You could also say karma or kama. It's the same thing. Kama means action. Related through my actions, have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that I shall fall heir. These are 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or man, lay or ordained. This is something that, for me personally, when I first saw this, the 5 remembrances, it connected with me, and I've always kept this in my mind, because all you have to do is to look at ourselves and to look at society to see how we do not remember these things. We try to avoid these things at all costs. We spend a lot of money trying to avoid these things. We spend a lot of effort and time trying to avoid these things. But this is natural. This is what happens. And if you think about it, go back to the time of the Buddha. We're at the time. This is in India, 2,600, maybe 3,000 years ago. There's new archaeological data that says it might be older. But anyway, this is a time of the Vedas, Brahmanism. This is right about before Hinduism. But if I'm not mistaken, Hinduism kind of came out of Brahmanism. But if I'm wrong, that's a whole other topic. So this is a time of rebirth, right? We're not. This is not a time of one God, heaven and hell, of the Abrahamic traditions in the Middle East. This is in India. This is rebirth. And so, could you imagine this person, Siddhartha, knowing that, okay, this is what happens. There's a caste system. You're reborn. And now he realizes that he will have to grow old. He will have to get sick. He will have to die. He will have to lose everybody that he's ever loved and be separated from him. That's where that whole thing is, being separated from that is what that is dear and pleasing to me. That's not just people, but that's also everything that we like. So, and then he's going to die and be reborn and do that all over again. And he's done it a million, billion, whatever, how many times before, and he's got to do it over again. It sounds like a prison, doesn't it? A torturous prison. And so that's why the Buddha's like, I'm getting the hell out of this place. There's got to be a way out, and I'm going to find it. This is great. I mean, if you look at it from a Christian perspective, I got to suffer, I got to get through it one time, and then I'm good, and then I can go to heaven. So, there's not necessarily that strong desire to, to do this kind of practice in that, because it's like, no, I'm one life and I'm good, and then I don't have to worry about it. So that's the perspective of, where this Buddhism and what the Buddha Siddhartha did That's where he's coming from. So let's go back to the 5 remembrances. The first one, old age. How many of you have dyed your hair? How many of you have used some kind of creams, right? Some kind of anything. We do not like old age. Not in the slightest. As a matter of fact, what do we do these days? 100, 200 years ago, the elderly, they were part of the family. They were the elders. They stayed around. These days, what do we do? We got old folks' homes. We got 55 and up communities. You're old. Get the heck out of my sight. Go over there. It's not quite like that. I mean, obviously, there's economic issues and all these kind of things. But we try to avoid knowing that we are going to get old at all costs. When we see that, I'm 35 years old, and I'm weird because I saw my first gray hairs and I was like excited. I was like, yeah, I got gray hairs, nice. I usually keep my head shaved, hence my avatar is shaved. But maybe about a year ago, I grew my hair out a bit and I started seeing gray hairs. And I thought to myself, yes, I'm getting old. It's a subject of contemplation. And that's a good point, right? Try looking for a job over 55. And what you'd like to do, you'd like try to make yourself younger to get that job, right? And why is there an issue with the job for people over 55, right? Our feelings about old age. Old people are useless. Old people can't do this. Old people can't do that, right? We have such an aversion to old age that it attaches itself to all aspects of society. Experience is no longer valued. That's a big one. So let's see. Oh, we're getting lots of good talk. This is what I like. And this is a kind of a topic that everybody can relate to, right? Because there's certain topics in Buddhism that can be hard to understand. But when we start talking about the remembrances, old age, sickness, death, everybody can relate to that because we all have to go through it. And we all here, everybody here right now is probably in a wide variety of ages, age range. And I don't need to know everybody's age. But see, and this is why it's good to kind of come together like this to talk about these kind of things. So that's old age, right? We don't want to think about old age. We'll have to worry about old age when it gets there. And it's kind of interesting because you think, well, aren't we supposed to always be in the moment? Like, aren't we supposed to stay in the present and not think about the future? So then naturally, that's why we don't think about old age. And I say, liar, you're lying to yourself. Trying to trick yourself, your ego is. So the reason why the Buddha wants us to start to think about these things is not to be depressed, is not to feel bad, but to understand that our time is so short and that we don't know how long we have. Those of you who know me, who've been hearing me talk for a while, I'm 35, right? I was married at one point. My wife died 8 years ago. This is, no matter, you could be 90, you can be 25, you can be 12. It doesn't matter. Life is short. And so while we are here, now is the time to practice. Now is the time to be mindful. That's the point. That's why the Buddha taught this way. This is why he wants us to remember these things. So, because there's a quote from the suttas, and it says, "Get up, stand up. What's your need for rest? There is no rest for those afflicted with the fire of craving or the arrow of craving." So it's like you're suffering. You're not awakened. So why are you resting? So it almost feels like a Buddhist drill sergeant. Right? Get up, stand up, don't rest, don't be a slacker. Keep practicing, because time is short. I love older people. I have always been growing up. I never quite was able to match with my peers. I always was more comfortable speaking with older people. And even today, the same thing. I don't quite fit with my peers. And I grew up, my father was a teacher, but he was also a landscaper. And there was, in my town is known throughout my state as a place of, and my county is known throughout my state as a place of old folks' homes and elderly 55 and over communities. And my dad, as a landscaper, was in these communities very often. And growing up, of course, I was landscaping with him. I got to meet, as somebody who's a student of history, I got to meet so many World War II veterans on both sides. I got to hear their stories. This is what I like to do with elderly people. I like for them to tell me their stories, because the stories are very interesting. Most people don't care about the stories, but when they get old, I'm sure they'll appreciate that somebody would actually want to know their story. But most people, we don't want to know these things. Like Deacon said, experience is not valued. You're old, we don't care about you anymore, just go away and die. In some cultures, they have that concept of when you get to a certain age, you go into the woods. And basically you die. But, it's not really a negative thing about the elderly. It's a very interesting concept. You turn a certain age, you go into the woods as your final journey. So, but that's a little going off topic. So that's old age, and we can get back to this in a bit if we want. But so sickness, the next thing that we love, we just love it. My Dhamma talk a couple weeks ago, I think, was about how to be with the sick, how to be with your sickness, because I had just gotten over the flu, and was with my flu-ness for 4 days without any medications or doctor because of the snow. And I'm not a big person that I need to run to the doctor in the first place. I try to be with my sicknesses and follow the example of Ajahn Chah and stuff like this, and to be. But it's tough to be with your sickness, especially something like the flu. So but it's just to be there. Now, our sicknesses, what do we do when we're sick? What's the first thing we do when we're sick? Other than curse. Dang it, we're sick. I have this and that. I have to do it at work. The kids got to get this, the blah, 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 the house, the bills, this and this and this and this. And my life is going this way. I can't afford to get sick. So we go to the doctor. Give me all your medications. Throw them at me. And we think that the medications cure our sickness. That's the funny part. There's no such thing as a cure for a cold, cure for the flu. The sickness, all it does is to make it a little easier on you and in some cases make it shorter so that it's not as long of a sickness. So I'm not against medicine per se, because let's face it, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, you had the flu. There's a large chance you were going to die. So there's nothing wrong with modern medicine per se, uh, but it's more the issue is our aversion to that sickness. You know, 100 years ago, if you got a cut, how easy it could be infected and you could die. So it's more about the aversion of our sickness than the curing or the medical aspect of it, right? We don't like to be sick because it interrupts our life. But the sickness is great because it actually gives us a chance, if we take it, to slow down. To take a day or two from our busy, crazy lives that we don't think, we don't spend a second in mindfulness, a second in thought. So it takes us from that and gives us that chance. But what do? We sit, we watch TV, right? During the beginning parts of the flu, I tried to be mindful and I tried to meditate, and so it was very hard. And the funny thing is, though, since the last time I had the flu, which was around 10 years ago, I've advanced enough in my meditation practice to be able to see the different mind states and how my mind is affected in various um, aspects. And this time I noticed how clouded my mind was from the sickness, how hard it was to concentrate, how hard it was to think straight. It was interesting. Um, and so this is the sickness. Instead of us thinking about it as in a negative light, as something that has negatively come to me, some people even think, oh, my karma, I'm sick, which is BS. But anyway, oh, this is so negative, this is so negative. If you take it in a positive manner and you use it as a tool, you use it as a chance to practice and to see and to observe, then you are taking that sickness and eradicating or getting away from that negativity, which is important, because this is the reason why we don't want to think about these things, is because of our aversion to them. The aversion is that thought of, we don't want to have anything to do with it. Aversion is part of dukkha, is part of our dissatisfaction, suffering of life. We either, when we have come into contact with something, a person, an item, a sound, whatever, with our senses, we put a judgment to it. We like it, and if we like it, we want more of it. Or we don't like it, and if we don't like it, we don't want to have anything to do with it. We want to run away from it. We don't want it anywhere near us. Whether that's the flu or the person at work that you get annoyed by. Go away. We don't want to have anything to do with you. So that the issue at hand, in thinking about these things and and coming to an understanding that they are now normal and natural and it will happen to us, it is popping that bubble of aversion. It is seeing things as they truly are and understanding things as they truly are and saying, okay, I have the choice on how I want to react to this situation. And I'm going to take it as something to learn from, as something to practice with. If you know Ajahn Brahm, one of my favorite stories that he tells is when he was a monk in Thailand, a young monk. He just was starting out, like in his first couple years, and he got sick with malaria, and he was in the hospital, and it was pretty serious. And Ajahn Chah, his teacher, who's very famous Thai monastic, um, very famous, came to visit him. And Ajahn Brahm is saying in his story, he's telling about how it's so amazing. I was so happy that my great teacher would come and visit me. And then he talks about what happens when Ajahn Chah comes into the hospital room. He says, Brahmavasamo, that's his full name, Ajahn Brahms. You will either get better or you will die. And then he walked out. Could you imagine going to somebody who's sick and saying, "Oh, hi, Bill. You'll get better or you'll die"? Most people, they would be totally flabbergasted if you said. But Ajahn Brahm talked about how deep and amazing that phrase was, and it totally is, because it's just the nature of having that sickness. You will either get better or you will die. That is the nature of sickness. And I think that's a nice, what do they call that when you say something and it goes from one topic to the other, like in radio. But anyway, that's a nice step to the next topic, which is, of course, death. The favorite thing that we love to think about all of the time. We love death so much. And yes, that's being sarcastic. Did you know sarcasm is actually aversion? Sarcasm is anger? I never thought about that until the last couple of years. I always thought I was such a nice, peaceful person, but I was so sarcastic. And then I realized, wow, I actually have anger as well. I have aversion. That's a great thing about this practice. You realize that everything that you thought, all of these concepts that you build up about yourself are popped. They're just like, yeah, I thought I was this way. And I had this ego feeling of I was a nice, calm, peaceful person because I was never really that angry. Nobody's ever seen me. Maybe 2 people in life have ever seen me get angry. Yeah, segue. That's a good. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Danica. So we're segueing into death, and then I just totally went on another tangent. But so anyway, so death. This is something, of course, if you really think about it, old age and sickness, the main reason why we do fear those, we don't want to think about those, is because they are symptoms, conditions, and possibilities leading to death. Death is the ultimate avoidance, is the ultimate thing that we want to avoid at all costs. And it's almost the only thing that we truly cannot avoid. All of us will die. It is just as simple as that. We will all die. Say that to yourself. I will die. It's hard to say that. It's hard to kind of understand that. It's hard to think about that. And this is why there's many practices in the Buddhist teachings on how to understand. In the Buddha's day, there were these things called charnel grounds. And I think to some extent they still kind of exist in India today. But charnel grounds are where people went and put the bodies of dead people. And they just were there to decay. So the Buddha, as part of the Dhamma practice, advised monks to go to these charnel grounds and observe these bodies decaying in various states of decay, to understand and to contemplate and to practice understanding that this will be me one day. This body that I love so much, that I beautify, that I color my hair, that I do all of these things, I will be this bloated sack of maggot meat. And when I had one of my last retreat at Bhavana Society was meditation on death. And I was very fortunate. Bhante Rahula was able to produce a book. See, in places like Sri Lanka and Thailand, this is a lot more allowed and common. In America, people would look at you like you're nuts. They have this book of these various people. When they died, I guess they gave their body to the Sangha or whatever. And these bodies were, people took pictures and observed the various states of decay over months. And so I was able to look at this book as part of my contemplation and to observe the various states of decay of this dead body. And it's very interesting. Yeah, well, see, in Thailand and Sri Lanka, there is always a skeleton hanging in the Dhamma hall in the monastery, and it's a real skeleton. At Bhavana Society in West Virginia, there's a skeleton, but it's a school skeleton. You can't, in America, you can't have a real person skeleton hanging in a in a video. Me? No, I'm in America. Uh, yeah, at Bhavana. Well, that's where I go. Yeah, and you know what's funny? I meditate in front of that skeleton. I've actually, and this is before I did because I've always been keen on the meditation on death. Maybe it's because I have seen so much death in my life. Even before my wife wasn't the first person I watched die. Going back to my being 10 years old, watching my grandfather die of cancer. So death has been something that's been very common in my life, and it's become normal. In that way, I'm kind of lucky that 100 years ago, it was a lot more common in people's lives. 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a funeral home or when somebody died, you had the wake at your house. You kept the body at your house. There's a lot more avoidance of death these days than there used to be. So yeah, and Sabi, at that meditation hall, when I do my walking meditation, sometimes I walk and I stand in front of the skeleton, right? And it's a lot easier now. When I was big, it was harder to feel my bones. Now that I had this surgery and I'm normal size, I can feel my bones. And what I will do is at this skeleton, I'll feel the skeleton's cheekbone, right? And then I'll feel my bone. And it's like, holy crap, I have a bone just like the skeleton. I literally have, and then you start to think about, like, you literally have a skeleton inside you. This is weird. And it's like, and you start to really realize that what your body is. Your body, and the Buddha talks about 32 parts of the body, and this is all part of contemplating the body. Contemplating the body for what it is. We have this beautification when we see a beautiful woman or a handsome man, and I see a woman, and it's like, whoa, yeah, she's hot. But you know what though? At this point, instead of following that, my training and my insights, I realize, yeah, but you know what? And I'm gonna sound. This is gonna sound like a serial killer kind of thing, but cut her open, and she's the same as me inside. Organs, skin, blood, phlegm. Yeah, this is this body that I'm attracted to, right? Well, I'm attracted to this. Yeah, and the farts. That's a good. That's a good point. you know. So you realize, you know what? This is just another being who's stuck in this samsara, who's stuck in this body, in this life, just like me. So that attraction is cut right there. I'm not attracted to. It's more. It goes from an attraction to an empathy, and that's an interesting thing. But that's also kind of a little bit of an aside. Going back to death. So growing up as a kid, and obviously observing death. I mean, my first funeral was 10 years old. I saw many funerals. I saw, and up until, my grandparents died, so I've been to many, many funerals. And I always thought to myself from a young age, what is this crap? This everybody's in black. Well, I love black, by the way. I love the color black. I don't see the color black as a mourning thing or like I'm supposed to be depressed or sad. For me, growing up, my heroes, the heroes wore black, like Luke Skywalker and Mad Mardigan from Willow and stuff like that. So I love black. But anyway, so I'd be at these funerals. What is this with this crying and this and that? It doesn't feel right. It doesn't make much sense to me. And then as I got a little older, my teenagers, I heard about like the Irish funerals with like propping the Irishman up, the dead person up, and giving him a beer. And I thought to myself, now that's more like it. And then I found out about in New Orleans when they have the band, right? When somebody dies and they have the band and they're dancing down the street. I said, that's more like it. To me, that makes a lot more sense. It's celebrating this person's life, not being attached or grieving their death. And so, for me, what my society kind of says this is what you're supposed to do when somebody dies, it just never quite fit. Among many other things that never quite fit for me growing up until I became a Buddhist and I found Theravada and it all clicked, and this is like, yeah, this is home. This is me. This is where I'm supposed to be. So death, in our society, do I remember my wife's birthday? I remember my wedding anniversary, and I remember the day that she died. But I think I do. I think it might be August 14th. But it's a date that doesn't stick with me as much as my wedding anniversary and the day she died. It's kind of interesting, right? And what is that? What's that thought? That we know because of that experience of losing somebody that close to you, it's hard to forget a day like that, right? So that day is etched in your memory. Whereas somebody's birthday, especially for a guy, I'm horrible with people's names, let alone their birthdays. So it's quite easy for me to forget somebody's birthday. But I think it's kind of culturally trained in women that they understand, that they know the importance of remembering these things. But so yeah, when I was married, my wife knew all those things. I didn't have to worry about any of it. everybody's birthdays, who's getting married, who's this, who's that. But that's interesting. It's almost very like Asian. It's very Chinese. It's like having that shrine to the ancestor kind of thing. So we have an aversion to death, partly because we don't know what's after it, right? I mean that's really the big to do, isn't it? Right? We don't really know what's after death, and because we don't know, we fear. We're in the woods at night. We hear a sound. We automatically think it's a lion, or in my case, an alien. We automatically think it's the worst thing that's coming to kill us. Right? So when we think of death, we automatically think, oh, it must be the worst thing, you know. But we want it to be nice. It was the zombies, yeah. So, because we have these fears, then death is something that we don't want to think about, right? And I think about, like, when I think about Catholics, the people who believe in heaven, I always thought to myself, if you really, truly, utterly believe in heaven, then what is there really to fear? There's more to fear in being a Buddhist or being rebirth, because you don't know what the heck you're going to be in your next life, right? Nuns! I went to Catholic school. I know about the nuns. So, for me, what is there really to fear if you really believe in heaven? So, but I think there are those people who really have that true faith. And I have a lot of respect for people like that. Even though it's a different religion, it's a totally different kind of method of understanding and practicing life, but I have respect for that. The people who truly do have that faith, that's fine. That's somebody who they know what they believe, and they believe it 100%. That's good. Live and let live. So it's just kind of the same thing in a way with Buddhism, right? If you understand that you're going to come back, kind of what's there to worry about death? Other than what might happen afterwards. What might you be reborn in, right? So, that there's a lot of issues regarding death, and because of these fears, because of this aversion, and of course death does what, right? You can look at my example. I lost my wife. Death takes the people that we love, our children even, our spouses, our family members, and takes them away. And because of our attachment to these people, we suffer. And even, it's interesting because I thought to myself, when I was moving towards becoming a Buddhist and really getting into it, I thought to myself, it might be hard to not see my wife again, right? It's so much easier to believe in a heaven. You'll see everybody you love up in heaven and everything will be nice. There's nothing easy about Buddhism and the practice of Dhamma. There's absolutely nothing easy. This is why, there might be 600 million Buddhists in the world, but how many real practitioners of Dhamma are there in the world? Not that many. Not that many. Even there's a quote by the Buddha. He says, "Few are those who cross the stream so hard to cross. Most wander up and down the the banks of the stream. So it's not an easy practice. And you have to come to terms with just things as they are. This is the reality of things. And regardless of your thoughts and your emotions, that doesn't change the reality. And the reality is we're all going to die. Whether it's today, whether it's tomorrow, whether, I don't know, a meteor comes right through the window and hits and kills me, or whether I die in my bed at 103, I'm going to die. There's no escaping it. And when we come to terms with this, when we start to become at peace with it, that is when we are truly able to live. Because we are losing that fear. So this is why working in my lab for all eternity. That's why I never liked the whole heaven. Heaven always sounded boring to me, to be quite honest with you. It always, I like, what do? Okay, you go to heaven, you meet everybody. Then it's like for millions of years. It just sound boring. I always wanted to come back. I always had this, even as a young kid, steeped in Catholicism. I always had a affinity for rebirth. It always made more sense to me. I always liked it better. Now, of course, back then as a kid, what I thought of rebirth was I wanted to know what it would be like in 500 years, because I'm born now. I'm never going to see that we're going to go travel to other stars and do all this amazing stuff and all these sciences and all the technology and everything that's going to happen. I want to be able to come back and see all this stuff. And now that I've found the teachings of the Buddha and I understand it a little bit more, I think to myself, just like the Buddha said, I really want to come back and grow old and get sick and lose everybody I love again and do all. Hell no. I'm pretty content with making this my last life, or at least shooting for it. They say shoot for the stars. Shoot for the moon, you'll end up in the stars, or whatever. Shoot for the stars, you'll end up at the moon. I might not become awakened in this life, but at least I'll be closer to it. I don't want to come back again. That's horrible. Why would you want to? Oh, it's like that movie Groundhog Day, right? Having to live that same day over and over again. I wouldn't want to come back. I'm ready. I'm good. This lifetime, hopefully this is my last lifetime. I'm done. I'm good. I'm checking out. Or as, those of you who know me, you know that I am, hopefully I put in my application and I'm waiting to be accepted, and hopefully going into Bhavana as a resident with intent to renounce and become a monk. And I've been reading a lot of books by monks, and one of my favorites is a book, and if you read it, if you see the title and you think of what you have, like maybe either a dirty mind or you think of modern perspectives, you think, oh, that's the name of a book by a monk. The book is called Getting Off. And after I read the book, I understand. Getting off is, I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm done. I'm getting out of this. This samsara, this life that people consider normal. No. I'm good. I'm getting off at the next stop. I'm getting out of here. Right? And so when you have these, and this is where these 5 remembrances help us to come to these conclusions and to move forward with our practice and to help us start to see things as they truly are. So when we are able to continually remember that, time is short. We're done. I'm getting sick. I'm getting old. I'm dying. I want to practice. And I think this is a huge reason as to why, other than feeling an affinity to it, and feeling like almost like I was a monk in a former life, this is a huge reason why I want to become a monk. Because the practice has become basically more important to me than anything except for maybe my parents and my siblings and my family. And that practice is so important that yeah, I want to do it. I want to make this my life. Now, I could go into it and 5 years later I said, yeah, I thought I wanted to, but I don't. So you never know. You never know. That's another thing, that's something that we don't like to think about, is that life is totally unexpected. We never know. I think about my short 35 years on this planet. All the things I was so sure about, and man, as a teenager, as a kid, I was so cocky, and I because I was intelligent and I knew a lot of things, and I studied a lot of things. I was a student of history, so I knew this is exactly, I knew things. And then life laughed at me and showed me other things. Life was like, yeah, no. What you think you know? No, it's nothing. So, at this point in my life, basically I make plans and I think I know what I'm doing. But I also expect it to be to actually happen in life to be totally different. Because you just don't know. So, well, it is 10 o'clock my time, so it is about that time to end. So, unless there's any final comments or questions, we can end here. Thank you for being a very active audience. This is what I love. I love when people are able to talk and to discuss, and so that we all come here as Dhamma friends, as those of us who are practicing in whatever way we are practicing. We know here people come here and they practice Buddhism and something else, and whatever way we are practicing, we are striving to better ourselves and to become more at peace with the world around us. So it is good when all of us can come together and to share this Dhamma, to share this reality, especially of something like tonight when we're talking about something that affects us all, old age, sickness, death. So thank you all for coming and sharing in this Dhamma, creating merit, and coming together and creating topics of contemplation so that we can think about this in the future. So friends, until next time, Sukhi Hantu, may you be happy, and may your practice flourish. Nice to meet those of you who I have not met before, and good to see old faces.